I am immortal, and I am not alone. Now is the time of the gathering, when the stroke of a sword will release the power of the quickening. In the end, there can be only one.
Few ideas are as ominous and important as the gathering in the overall lore of Highlander. All immortals inevitably prepare for this event that hangs over their lives. A reckoning from which there is no escape. It's the promised moment that signifies the end of their endless battles. Throughout the course of their lives, everything they engage in, every alliance they forge, and every time they draw their swords, they all point towards the gathering. For something as central to the mythos, it is indeed weird how the idea is wrapped in a whole lot of vagueness. Even most immortals don't exactly know what it entails, just that it's happening someday for sure. Is it a literal summoning of the remaining immortals or some kind of tournament? And for a universe already overloaded with mystery, why does something so vague even matter to this extent? If you have these questions in mind, then allow me to break down the gathering, its meaning and rules, and what place it takes up in the Highlander franchise. So what exactly is the Gathering? Ramirez described the Gathering using a pretty straightforward but slightly cryptic definition.
When only a few of us are left, we will feel an irresistible pull towards a faraway land to fight for the prize.
It refers to how the last few immortals left on Earth will reunite and fight each other until only one remains. That person will be the winner of the prize. It's fairly consistent with the tagline I pointed out earlier. When the gathering takes place is not really consistent through the movies, because the first one was scripted to end the story without the possibility of any sequels. There, it happens in a faraway land, which is in New York City, America, and Connor wins the prize. In Highlander the series, 1992 to 1998, the gathering is supposed to take place in the first season itself to not break continuity from the film. At least this is what the protagonist Duncan MacLeod believes, because there are not many immortals left alive by that time compared to the earlier numbers. However, it's never mentioned exactly how many mortals are left alive. Duncan, or any other character for that matter, talks about the irresistible pull to a particular place. References to the gathering are dropped after the third season, and it's not known when it will finally happen. In every other version since then, it's not happened at all, and the game continues. Some fans suggest that the gathering is a cyclical generational event, so it happens after every couple centuries. However, this is not in tune with the idea of the original movie. In Highlander Endgame, the only reference to the gathering says that it will happen in a very far off time, while it's not mentioned in Highlander The Search for Vengeance at all.
All the Immortals took the oath, all except one who dominates the world.
How does the game lead to the gathering? I know the whole idea of the gathering can seem like a pretty brutal thing. Logically, it makes very little sense for immortals to kill each other until only one prevails who becomes the winner. Considering all the gifts and abilities they have, doesn't it seem like that's a lot of death for no good reason? This theme was actually explored in Highlander the animated series, where instead of focusing on the game and the gathering, immortals decided to use their abilities for building civilization back from scratch. This premise was an open defiance of the established lore, and naturally, it did not gather a lot of constructive criticism. If you're thinking in this direction, I can't say you're entirely wrong. But hey, this is the very backbone of the Highlander mythos. The game is not something most immortals engage in because they simply enjoy killing. It's just what needs to be done. In Highlander, people who are born with the quickening become immortal after their first death, meaning if they're killed untimely by any unnatural means. This does not actually kill them for good, and after this, they can die only if their head is removed or destroyed. Immortals and pre-immortals also cannot biologically have children, and they can sense the presence of others like them. By beheading these other immortals, they can take the quickening from those people. This duel is broadly called the game, which happens across centuries. Most immortals develop great fighting skills, which are usually passed from master to student, like Ramirez and Connor, and they can fight with all kinds of weapons. Axes, machete, spears, sickles, everything can be found in the franchise, but the most commonly used weapon is a sword. These weapons are very dear to the immortals, and they carry them at all times. In fact, in Highlander the series pilot episode The Gathering, the script mentions that Duncan MacLeod lifted a beautiful katana samurai sword out of apparently nowhere, and it was considered to be almost a part of him, just as a 38 police special is to a cop. Later, he himself tells Felicia Martins to take such good care of the sword that it becomes an extension of herself and the only friend she ever has. Coming back to the game, immortals don't always stick to a particular style for engaging in it. Some of them, like Slan Quents, consider headhunting a full-time thing, while others only pick up their weapons when they're actively challenged. It's not exactly mandatory for them to play the game. Some can choose to retire for numerous reasons. Duncan himself did so in 1872 after the tragic deaths of his wife and adopted son, although it was temporary. There have also been others, such as Darius, a known pacifist, and John Durgan, who have tried to retire permanently. The former did it because he was tired of war, after having spent his life as a general during the late antiquity. Some immortals who retire also choose not to carry their weapons with them, such as Grace Chandel. The only downside of this is that without their swords, they're at a much greater risk of getting Ned Starked. The only safe option for retired immortals to not become targets is to live on holy ground, where they are safe from other immortals. But this does not also guarantee safety from normal humans, because Darius was attacked by the Hunters while being within holy grounds. The idea of the game is different from the Gathering, however. Both involve duels among immortals, but the Gathering is sort of the endgame duel with only a few immortals, as the others are eliminated during the game before. The survivor of the Gathering, as mentioned, wins the prize, which basically is the collective essence or quickening of all the other immortals. This kind of power gives the winner godlike status. Hence, in the end, there can be only one.
Highlander!
The unwritten rules that make the Gathering possible. Coming to one of the most central ideas of Highlander lore, immortals cannot just fight with each other in an arbitrary fashion. Even with their deadly duels, there are some rules that need to be followed. These are not exactly written or codified anywhere, but act as a code of honor that immortals adhere to. Some are less set in stone than others, so I'm going to look at only the most consistent and non-negotiable ones. The first one, of course, is what we have discussed right at the beginning. There can be only one. The last immortal standing will become all-powerful. What's interesting here is the fact that in some versions, this very power makes them godlike, but also takes away their immortality. Kind of a weird trade-off if you ask me. But irrespective of whether the prize is considered worthy or not, the fight cannot be refused. This does not mean that immortals have to start fighting with each other the moment they meet, because some team up after developing friendships. Some even develop romantic connections and stay together for centuries. Despite their feelings towards other immortals, they all know that one day they will have to duel against each other. Most of them do not like the fact that they have to spend their entire lives engaging in violence, so they prefer to stay isolated, but everyone knows that the Gathering is inevitable and they have to take part in it. The second rule is die to live. We've touched upon this as well when we talked about the first death. Immortals are born just like any other person, and they grow old as well. They do not inherently attain immortality by birth and realize this fate only when they are killed for the first time. They wake up from this apparent death with no injuries, and whatever appearance they experienced in their first death remains the one they get to live with for the rest of their lives. This is why some immortals look like kids while others look very old. The first death is not exactly an accident in most cases. Other immortals can understand if someone has the potential to live forever, and they make it a point to ensure this person dies at the right time so they can gain an ally in them. While this is not universally followed, many veterans also leave newbie immortals alone long enough for the latter to get adequate training. The third rule says to take his head. Immortals are immune to pretty much everything except decapitation, because this leads to the transfer of their quickening. This does not mean that they cannot be injured, or that they don't feel any pain at all. They can heal from their injuries very quickly, even those that are typically fatal for other people. There's no rule that only a fellow immortal can kill another. Anyone can, really, but it can only be done through decapitation. This is why they don't battle each other with guns or arrows and prefer using swords. The fourth rule refers to the quickening, which is an important goal in the process of the game. Whenever an immortal dies, their power is released, and if there's another immortal around, the energy goes into the latter's body. This process is called the quickening, and it sure sounds nice because becoming more powerful is a no-brainer. However, the process is extremely painful, but most of them consider it worth the pain. The producers of the TV show have described the quickening as similar to an electrical storm. This increased power does not manifest immediately, it slowly shows effects. For instance, it can translate to quicker healing, faster speed, or greater strength. It goes without saying that the more powerful the immortal, the greater power is absorbed from them upon their death. Rule number 5 is about the Gathering itself. It explains the end goal. The sixth rule refers to the fact that immortals cannot engage in any kind of battle on holy ground. This is a somewhat mystical rule that's connected to an unknown power. Holy land can be any area or building considered sacred by any community, such as Native American sacred lands, churches, chapels, monasteries, mosques, and temples. If someone breaks this rule, the consequences are often disastrous. The Highlander television series mentions how the destruction of Pompeii was triggered by the fact that two immortals had battled on on the holy ground. In Highlander, Search for Vengeance, Colin MacLeod was struck by lightning when he refused to put his sword down inside Stonehenge. Similarly, in Highlander 3, The Sorcerer, when Connor and Kane were fighting in a Buddhist shrine, the former's blade was shattered and the shrine's power was revealed to the latter. However, the interpretation of this rule has been somewhat flexible, because in the episode The Road Not Taken, Duncan was challenged by Kim Sun to a friendly sparring match. This happened on holy ground without anything bad happening, so it can be assumed that the rule holds true only if there's actual violence involved. The next rule is similar to Spider-Man's Spidey sense. It's an odd kind of pull called the buzz that immortals feel whenever they're in the presence of another of their kind. It can also manifest as physical symptoms such as pain. Makes you wonder how, when they fight each other, they must already be in a lot of pain from that kind of close proximity, right? The 8th rule is not exactly set in stone, but it's followed as a mark of honor. It says that only one-on-one battles are considered worthy, so immortals cannot gang up on each other. For instance, it might seem like a good idea for a group of less powerful immortals to take on one very powerful guy, but that doesn't really happen. They can go on missions as a group, but the quickening happens after a 2-man duel only. There is a workaround for this rule though. Immortals who are allied with others can sacrifice their lives to their friend, transferring their powers. This friend can then take on a more powerful opponent with the combined energy of other immortals. Rule number 9 says that non-immortals should not be privy to the affairs of immortals. This is more of a protective measure, because if humans were aware of this, they would try to hunt immortals themselves. This is not strictly followed either, because many immortals have confided about their true selves to their mortal friends. The next rule states that immortals cannot have children as they are born sterile. The 11th rule is that immortals can breathe underwater. They cannot be drowned, because then that would come into conflict with the fact that their deaths can only be caused by cutting off their heads. This is not a very popularly used ability, but it's been consistently maintained since the very first Highlander film. Now that I've gone over the rules, it is interesting to see how the Gathering is basically these rules enforced to the limit. When the number of immortals dwindle with the games, the 6th sense, where they can feel each other's presence, gets so strong that it becomes impossible to resist that pull. It can drag 2 immortals to the same place whether they want to or not. Even the code of secrecy starts getting blurred, because at one point, it can become quite a task to not leave any mortal witnesses around for the game, so maintaining them can become more difficult. The rules are framed in such a manner that they ultimately lead to the Gathering, kind of how all roads lead to Rome. Ramirez's prophecy and what's at stake. Immortals are not necessarily good people. There are many villainous ones among them who view the game as a rite of passage that allows them to get one step closer to winning the prize. Obviously, they do not have good intentions for what they will do with that power afterwards. They constantly hunt others to gain power, while some immortals have a higher moral ground and believe that it's their duty to make sure that no one evil wins the prize, even if they themselves cannot win it. Earlier in the movie, Connor's mentor Ramirez had warned that if an evil immortal wins the prize, they would be capable of enslaving humanity and condemning all people to an eternity of darkness. In this context, I need to point out that the TV show differentiates the quickening of evil immortals from that of the good guys. If someone absorbs the power of the former, it can turn them evil as well. This is called the Dark Quickening. Essentially, this gives a much bigger meaning to the Gathering than just a duel where one man prevails over everyone else. The Gathering is a deciding factor for what happens to the future of humanity. Why New York and why now? In the 1986 film, Connor MacLeod was born during 16th century Scotland and was mentored by Ramirez after his first death. The present-day story focuses on New York in 1985, where the Gathering is finally happening. Connor is shown to have lived a secret life as an antiques dealer named Russell Nash, with an adopted daughter named Rachel and a love interest in forensic scientist Brenda Wyatt. He had watched his wife Heather grow old and die, so he was not particularly looking to be involved with anyone, but she had a way with him. An evil immortal named the Kurgan was responsible for the death of Ramirez centuries ago, and in the present day, he found out about Connor's involvement with Brenda and kidnapped her to draw him out. Before this, he killed another immortal and took his powers. Hence, the Gathering involved the last remaining immortals, Connor and the Kurgan. The former was forced to shed his assumed identity and confront his opponent at the Silverwood Studios to save Brenda, and after a high-powered duel, Connor finally decapitated him. He won the prize, but, as I mentioned before, this also turned him into a mortal. I'll explain this particular consequence of winning the prize in just a while. Now, you must be wondering why the final scene of the action shifted from Scotland to the USA. There's no particular reason for the Gathering happening in New York, especially considering that during the 1500s, where the story of Highlander began, it was a settlement of the Lenape tribal nation with a small population. The only explanation is that it suited the context of the faraway land that Ramirez spoke about. Another thing that's never explained is the kind of agency any immortal has in choosing enemies or allies. 3 of the 5 immortals we actually meet meet in the film are morally good: Connor, Castagir, and Ramirez. The Kurgan, however, was determined to become the sole survivor and even knew that Connor was an immortal before Connor himself was aware of the fact. He plays the quintessential bad guy who commits misdeeds because he wants power and glory. Some fans say that since only a handful of immortals appeared in the movie, it felt a little disappointing. However, I think that because not a lot of immortals were actually shown on screen, it intensified the power struggle even more, making it personal on some level, instead of giving it the feel of a tournament. How the Gathering actually plays out in Highlander 1986. While the lore talks about the last few, the movie effectively shows us a very small cluster of immortals left by the time we join the story. Here's a quick summary of how the Gathering plays out in the film. The first confrontation happens between Russell and Iman Facile, which reveals the former's identity as Connor MacLeod. They engage in a duel and Connor strikes Facile's head off, gaining his powers. This catches the attention of the police, who take him in for questioning. He's finally released due to lack of evidence, but Facile's sword becomes an object of fascination for Brenda due to its historical value. She slowly gets pulled into the secret of the Immortals, unaware of the danger involved. In fact, the Kurgan has already arrived in New York by that time owing to the buzz, and had adopted the alias Victor Kruger. He tries to fight with Connor, who is at a disadvantage for not carrying his sword. Thankfully, due to police intervention, they were forced apart. Later, in Central Park, Connor comes across Son de Castagir, fellow immortal and a longtime friend. They talk about how only a few of them are alive, so the Gathering is inching closer. That also meant that they would have to face each other sooner than they think. Castagir gets killed by the Kurgan while dueling with him in an alley, and his quickening goes to Kruger. With the other two immortals out of the way, the movie then sets the stage for the final confrontation of the Gathering. The Kurgan meets Connor at a church, where the latter is lighting a candle for his deceased wife's birthday. He taunts Connor by saying how he killed Ramirez and violated Heather, something that she had never revealed. Connor gets extremely agitated, but is unable to fight because they're on holy ground. After becoming privy to the Highlanders' dalliance with Brenda, the Kurgan kidnaps her to edge Connor into accepting his challenge. I can't really explain the duel here because I really believe you should watch it for yourself in case you haven't already, but Connor wins in the end, of course, and gains the combined quickening of every immortal to have ever walked the earth. The sheer power of that destroys all the windows and doors around him. Fortunately for him, the police closed the case, assuming that Victor Kruger was the serial killer they were looking for. As I said before, some fans thought that 4 immortals battling it out was a bit of a letdown, but the movie has a limited runtime. I don't think more would have been better in this case. At least with each duel, we were given the sense that the final battle is near. Instead of focusing on the long history of the Immortals, the movie focused solely on the Gathering, which was also a one-on-one duel instead of a continuous battle involving many Immortals. Could it have been better? Definitely. But remember, this was the very first Highlander movie. No one had any idea that it would blow up to become one of the most beloved fantasy franchises, and the filmmakers intended to close the story instead of continuing. What exactly is the prize at the end of the Gathering? In the first movie, after Connor becomes the winner, he also turned immortal and was able to have children. He returned to Scotland with Brenda, and the connection he shared with nature increased to the point where he almost became like Professor Charles Xavier, capable of knowing the thoughts and dreams of any being on Earth. To him, this power made him one with living beings. There's a slight mismatch with Ramirez's prophecy regarding what would have happened if this power had gone to the Kurgan instead. He was probably not aware of the fact that winning would render the victor mortal, which in turn would mean they would die one day. So the eternity of darkness thing he had warned about seems like an exaggeration. But let's not blame him for that. After all, no one had won the prize before, so nobody had any way of knowing what exactly it would entail. It is possible that giving up immortality can seem like a step down, but for people who have been alive for so long and had to watch their loved ones die, and knowing they could also not have kids, maybe becoming mortal truly was the best gift out there. At least for Connor, it allowed him to build a life with Brenda and use his power to help people as much as he could. This theory of sacrificing immortality is not confirmed by the TV show, however. There, Connor only says that an evil man like Slan Quince would make mankind suffer an eternity of darkness from where there will be no coming back, in case he's the last one standing. There can be only one, so if that person is good, then the world will basically see a true golden age. If not, there will be anarchy and chaos all over. How later lore muddies the idea of the Gathering. Now, if you are just looking for an explanation of the Gathering strictly in reference to the original film and do not want to know about the extra credit lore, this section is just not for you. Remember how I said at the beginning of the video that there is a lot of debate about the timing of the Gathering? I mentioned how many consider it to be a cyclical event that happens after every couple centuries. The Gathering has not explicitly been shown in any Highlander stories except for the 1986 movie, and even with that, there's one question that always bothered me. Connor wins the prize, becomes immortal, lives out a happy life. But what happens after his eventual death? It becomes unclear if the idea is that there will never be any immortals ever again, or if the cycle will somehow restart after Connor's death. The first case would be quite an audacious interpretation, because after all, no one knows exactly how many immortals are chosen. For a cycle that's been going on for more than centuries, it's indeed a little odd to think that it will all go away with Connor winning the prize. Fans like to believe more in the second case, which also aligns with the idea that the gathering happens in a cyclical manner. After Connor's victory, he remains the last immortal only until his death, which would then initiate the process again with more immortals being born. The majority of sequels and spin-offs just imagine that the prize was never achieved in the first place, hence the final gathering is still nowhere in sight. This also creates multiple canon tracks, which then blurs the very concept of there can be only one final survivor. With more immortals and more games, it seems like people behind these adaptations have taken more liberties with the rules of the Highlander franchise. And at the end of the day, Highlander is not the kind of franchise people love because it's flawless. If anything, it's the opposite of that. I've just explained how the timeline can get messy, the rules can become more like guidelines, and some of the sequels are imaginative but poorly executed. There's a long-running inside joke where people pretend the sequels just don't exist, and the original film works well enough as a standalone. At the same time, you'll find people passionately defending even the worst entries by saying they should not be treated as canon. And believe me, if you try to go down the rabbit hole of figuring out what exactly constitutes canon, you'll somehow end up more confused than when you started. Despite these lingering debates, Highlander is one of the most beloved franchises. I don't know whether that's because of the story or all of the unanswered questions, but no one can argue that it's anything less than legendary.